Freemasonry in the Holy Land presents
Leo Müffelmann, Freemasonry in Nazi Germany, and the Grand Lodge in Palestine.
Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time we're looking into something pretty fascinating, the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany in exile in Palestine. And you mentioned you already have some background in Freemasonry, so we can kind of skip the basics, I think. But today we'll really try to uncover how this lodge came to be, against the backdrop of Nazi Germany, and explore the role of some really key figures like Leo Müffelmann. It's a story of resilience principle and this fight for Masonic ideals during really dark times.
Yeah, it's a compelling case study, of how even amidst this persecution, groups can be divided from within. So understanding the landscape of German Freemasonry before the Nazis is key here.
Okay, so let's set the stage. What was the scene like for Freemasons in Germany before the rise of the Nazi Party?
Well, it was more complex than I think a lot of people realize. You had these old Prussian lodges, which were quite traditional, emphasizing national identity and often Christian leanings.
Okay, like the old guard.
Exactly. Oh. And then you had your humanitarian lodges, more progressive, open to members of various faiths.
Interesting. Already some potential for conflict right there.
Exactly. And on top of that, you had this persistent accusation, not unique to the Nazis, but certainly amplified by them, that Freemasonry was part of some international Jewish conspiracy to undermine Germany.
That's chilling given what we know about the Nazis' ideology.
Indeed. So you've got these existing tensions within German Freemasonry, plus growing societal anti-Semitism. And it's against this backdrop that Leo Müffelmann and the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany, or SGVD, emerge.
Okay, you mentioned Müffelmann was a key figure. What made him and his lodge stand out? How did they navigate this complex pre-Nazi landscape?
Well, Müffelmann, he was deeply critical of what he saw as the increasing politicization of German Freemasonry, especially the mistreatment of Jewish members within some lodges. He was a staunch defender of the universality of the brotherhood, regardless of faith.
It's already clashing with the old Prussian-type lodges, I imagine.
You could say that.
Yeah.
And because of their stance, the SGVD had to receive its charter from the Grand Orient of France, making them irregular in the eyes of many other lodges.
Okay, so irregular. How would you explain that to someone who's not steeped in Masonic protocol?
Good point. Masonic recognition between Grand Lodges is a complex system. To be considered regular, you need adherence to certain landmarks, historical principles, and mutual recognition. And the SGVD, by going to the Grand Orient of France, which itself had some unorthodox practices, was outside this mainstream acceptance.
So even before the Nazis, they were kind of a maverick group. That's fascinating. How did this irregularity affect them? Did they try to gain recognition from other, more regular lodges?
That's an important nuance we'll get to later. But for now, let's shift our focus to the rise of the Nazi Party. Imagine the pressure on all German lodges when Hitler comes to power.
That must have been a turning point for everyone. How did the different lodges respond to the Nazi regime and its increasing influence?
Well, you see a range of reactions, from attempts at appeasement to outright defiance. Some lodges, desperate to survive, tried to blend in. They changed their names to remove Freemason-adopted Aryan paragraphs to exclude Jewish members. Some even publicly expressed support for Hitler.
A far cry from Masonic brotherhood. How did Müffelmann and the SGVD react to these actions?
They were vehemently opposed to such compromises. Müffelmann saw them as a betrayal of core Masonic principles. In their publication, Die alten Pflichten, you see him passionately condemning those who caved to the Nazi pressure. For him, the universality of the brotherhood was non-negotiable.
So you have this growing chasm lodges trying to appease the Nazis on one side and Müffelmann and the SGVD standing firm on the other. It's 1933, and the situation for Freemasons is becoming increasingly precarious. What happens next for the SGVD?
Well, with the writing on the wall, they make a difficult decision, one that will shape the rest of their story. They choose to dissolve the SGVD within Germany. It was an act of both defiance and preservation. They recognized that trying to operate under Nazi rule would mean compromising their values. And that was unacceptable.
That must have been a heart-wrenching decision, to essentially dismantle something they'd worked so hard to build.
Absolutely. But this is where Müffelmann's story and the story of the Symbolic Grand Lodge takes a dramatic turn. He manages to escape to Palestine and establishes the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany in exile. It was an incredibly bold move, a way of saying, we will not be silenced and our ideals will endure.
That sends chills down my spine thinking about him carrying that torch of Freemasonry amid such darkness.
Yeah.
It raises so many questions, though. Palestine in the 1930s, What was the context there? Was there already a Masonic presence? Were they welcomed?
It's important to note that Palestine at the time was under British mandate, and there was already a well-established Masonic community there, primarily under the English Constitution. While the specifics of their reception require further research, what we do know is that Müffelmann was not simply seeking refuge. He was actively trying to rebuild and gain recognition for the SGVD, even in exile.
Wow, so they're operating in exile,
Yes.
still considered irregular by many, and now trying to find their footing in a new land with its own established Masonic landscape. That had to be an uphill battle.
It was. And tragically, Müffelmann's own story ends in heartbreak. He eventually returned to Germany, perhaps on a mission to help others escape, or perhaps driven by a longing for home. Whatever the reason, he was captured by the Gestapo and died in their custody in 1934.
That's a devastating loss.
Yeah.
It makes this history so much more personal and poignant. What happened to the Symbolic Grand Lodge in exile after Müffelmann's death? Did they manage to carry on?
Yes, they did, but it was a constant struggle for legitimacy and recognition. Remember, they were already considered irregular, and now they're a lodge in exile led by those who fled Nazi persecution. It made their interactions with other Masonic bodies incredibly complex.
I can only imagine. It's a powerful testament to their dedication, though, to continue upholding these Masonic principles even under such difficult circumstances. It makes me think about those who stayed behind in Germany. What was their fate?
As you might imagine, it was a diverse picture. Some former Freemasons saw an opportunity in the new order and aligned themselves with the Nazi regime. They denounced their past and sought favor within the party.
That must have been a difficult pill to swallow for those who remained true to the values of Freemasonry.
Indeed. It was a betrayal of their oaths. But it's important to remember that survival often trumps principle in times of crisis. For many, it was a matter of staying alive, protecting their families. However, even those who tried to conform to fly under the radar weren't always safe. The Nazis had a deep distrust of Freemasonry, and that suspicion lingered.
So even outward conformity wasn't a guarantee of safety. What about those lodges that tried to adapt to appease the Nazi regime? What became of them?
Oh, alongside the human cost, there was the systematic dismantling of Freemasonry as an institution. The Nazis looted lodge property relentlessly, seizing buildings, bank accounts, artifacts, anything of value. It was partly about enriching the regime, but also about erasing the fraternity from German society.
It seems like they wanted to wipe out any trace of Freemasonry, both physically and ideologically. Was there any particular instance of this looting that stands out to you as particularly symbolic or even ironic?
There's a rather bizarre story about a painting of Marshal Blücher, a famous Prussian military leader. It was confiscated from a lodge and gifted to General Blomberg, a high-ranking Nazi official, for his birthday. The problem, Blücher had been a Freemason, and the painting depicted him with Masonic symbols. It caused quite a scandal within the Nazi party.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really shows how obsessed they were with rooting out Freemasonry, yet they couldn't even recognize it in a portrait of a famous figure.
Yeah.
So we've got these different threads. The Symbolic Grand Lodge in exile, struggling for recognition. Müffelmann's tragic fate, those who collaborated, those who tried to survive, and the Nazis' relentless campaign of eradication. What does it all mean? What can we learn from this complex and often tragic chapter of Masonic history?
Well, one of the most powerful takeaways is the stark contrast between those who compromised their principles and those who, like Müffelmann, stood firm, even at great personal cost. It forces us to confront difficult questions about what we would do in similar circumstances. How far we would go to defend our values when faced with tyranny.
That's a powerful reflection. It's easy to judge from a distance, but when you're in the midst of such turmoil, the choices become so much more difficult.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that history is rarely black and white. You know, within German Freemasonry, there was a spectrum of responses to the Nazi regime, from active collaboration to quiet resistance to tragic martyrdom. It challenges us to move beyond simple narratives of good versus evil and acknowledge the complexity of human behavior, especially in times of crisis.
It's a reminder that even within persecuted groups, there's this diversity of experience and choice. What about the Symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany in exile? What ultimately became of them? Did they manage to achieve the recognition they sought? Did they survive the war?
Their story is one of resilience, though their path to recognition was long and complicated. They did survive the war and continued to operate in Palestine, eventually relocating to Jerusalem. It took decades, but they eventually gained recognition from some major Grand Lodges, though not without challenges and debates within the global Masonic community.
That's a powerful testament to their perseverance. It wasn't just about survival. It was about upholding their vision of Freemasonry, even when so many others had compromised or been silenced. What's particularly striking to me is that they clung to this idea of regularity, even though they'd been forced into such an irregular situation. What was the significance of that for them?
It speaks to a deep commitment to tradition and legitimacy. Remember, they were already considered irregular by many due to their origins. By seeking recognition, even in exile, they were making a statement. They weren't a breakaway group. They saw themselves as the true inheritors of German Freemasonry, carrying the flame, while the lodges in Germany were either extinguished or forced to warp under Nazi pressure.
So it was about preserving not just the ideals, but also the lineage, the historical continuity of German Freemasonry. What a powerful story of resistance and dedication, I imagine, for the Freemasons who formed this lodge in exile. It was a way of keeping hope alive, of believing that one day they could return to a Germany free from Nazi tyranny and rebuild their fraternity.
It was a beacon of hope in dark times, a testament to the enduring power of human connection and shared values. And I think that's the most important takeaway for our listener today. This seemingly niche story of a Masonic lodge in exile speaks to universal themes of perseverance, resistance, and the struggle to preserve identity in the face of oppression. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can find ways to endure, to resist, and to hope for a better future.
You've given us so much to think about today. From the complex pre-Nazi landscape of German Freemasonry to the stark choices faced by lodges and individuals under the Nazi regime to the incredible story of the symbolic Grand Lodge in exile, this has been a truly enriching deep dive.
And I hope it inspires our listener to explore this topic further. There are many more stories to uncover, many more lessons to be learned. The history of Freemasonry under the Nazis is a rich and complex tapestry, woven with threads of courage, compromise, tragedy, and ultimately resilience.
For our listener who requested this deep dive, we hope this has been a journey of discovery and reflection, and we encourage you to continue your own exploration of this fascinating chapter of history.